Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to the Development Management and Licensing Committee. Before I ask the committee to introduce themselves, as it's his Remembrance Day, at 11 o'clock we'll observe a 2-minute silence. So in the run-up to 11 o'clock we sort of won't start something if it's going to get in the middle of that. So we'll act accordingly when we get there. So with no further ado, I'll ask the committee to introduce themselves, starting with Councillor Moody.
Councillor Jeff Moody, Tavistock North Ward.
Councillor Tony Leach, Oakhampton.
Councillor Neil Jory from Milton Ford Ward.
Councillor Graham Reid, Tavistock North.
Councillor Sam Wakeham, Hatherley.
Councillor Alistair Cunningham, Buckland Monacorum Ward.
Councillor Mott, Bridistow Ward.
Councillor Southcott, Bridistow Ward.
Bryony Hanlon, Senior Planning Officer for West Devon.
Pat Weimer, Head of Development Management.
I'm Rich Edel, Buckland Monacorum Ward and Chair of the committee.
Steve Guthrie, Drew Stainton Ward.
Catherine Bowen, Legal Advisor to the committee this morning.
Catherine Hall, Democratic Services Officer, West Devon.
Thank you very much. Item 2, apologies for absence. There are none. We're here. Item 3, declarations of interest. If anyone has any interests they wish to declare, could they do so now? Otherwise, if it occurs to you later on during the meeting, let me know. Any declarations of interest? Thank you. Item 4 was items of urgent business. There are none. So we move on to item 5, which is the confirmation of the minutes from the 7th of October. Can I take those as an accurate record of the meeting, please? All in favour? Thank you. Item 6, just waiting for Bryony to recover. Item 6 is a legal statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a brief reminder for the benefit of the public who might not be familiar with how the planning decisions are determined and the legal framework behind that. So briefly, the committee needs to consider the following points. Regard needs to be had to the development plan policies and other material planning considerations. Material planning considerations were those are about development or use of land. Decisions that are to be taken in accordance with the development plan unless other material considerations suggest otherwise. The committee needs to establish whether a development proposal complied with the development plan read as a whole. And where policies conflict, the committee has to undertake a balancing exercise involving the use of its planning judgment. And finally, the development plan policies must be read sensibly with words having their ordinary and natural meaning.
Thank you very much. The right part of the minutes. Okay, we have 2 planning applications in front of us today, and the first is 185625 FUL, which is a barn at Higher Carley Barns in Lifton. And I hand over to the planning officer for her report.
Okay, so this is a resubmission of a previous application that the committee considered, and the application is to change the use from holiday let to residential use with minor changes to the elevations, and the physical changes are part retrospective. So this is the aerial view just to show you the site in relation to Lifton. So the site is identified with a yellow hexagon, and that's up in the top left of the image. This is the site location plan, so this just shows the location of the barn itself and the access outlined in red. And then this is the block plan that shows you a bit more detail of the barn, its garden, and where the parking will go. These are both the existing and the proposed elevations, and the existing and proposed floor and roof plans. These are the photos that I took when I visited the site earlier this year. So So this is the view north. The view south, so you can see the other buildings in the wider setting of the application site. Close up. And the view east, just to show you the work that's been done. And you can see the roof lights there, as shown on the elevation, so you can just see those in context. The view northwest. This is the internal view of the building at the time of the site visit. The applicant has provided some more up-to-date photos, and you'll see those when the applicant makes his statement later on today. So the site is within the open countryside. The starting point is that that's an unsuitable location for open market housing. However, the site does have extant permission for conversion of the building, and that's to be used as a holiday let in association with a dwelling called Mohay. The building is not at risk, as it appears weather tight, so we wouldn't seek immediate action to save it. And an appeal decision in 1991 concluded that the building wasn't worthy of conversion based solely on its heritage value, and that wouldn't justify the conversion to permanent residential use. Officers consider that insufficient information has been provided to demonstrate that the removal of the holiday restriction would be justified, and on that basis, officers have recommended refusal.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions from the committee to the planning officer on her statement before we move on to the registered speakers? Anyone wish to ask any questions? No? Okay, that's very clear. Thank you very much. We have 3 registered speakers, and the first is Mr. Peter Sainsbury. Good morning. I'm sure you're no stranger to these committees, but you have 3 minutes to address the committee. Okay, you have 3 minutes to address the committee, and after that, the committee has the opportunity to ask you any questions. So when you're ready, off you go.
Thank you for saying. I would like to draw the committee's attention to recent planning applications at Palmer's Norley Farm, North Loo, as there are many planning similarities with my site. Both are traditional farm settings situated 1 to 1.5 kilometres from the nearest local services, and both sites have approvals from West Devon for conversion or change of use in 2015. Despite this, in 2023, the application for the conversion to the stable block at Norley Farm was refused by West Devon, partly on unsustainable issues and which also relate to mine. At the appeal in 2024, the inspector, quote, fundamentally disagreed with West Devon's view regarding isolation and sustainability issues, and given that the planning permissions had previously been granted for residential use, end quote, it would seem somewhat illogical to reason that the site is so distant from services as to render the proposed use in conflict with policies that are aimed at reducing the need to travel. Exactly the same applies to Orchard Barn. In the planning report for the application for the change of use to the stable block to residential, the case officer, who cross-refers to the inspector's comments about isolation and sustainability issues, said it is not considered reasonable to refuse the application on this basis, so permission was granted in July 2025. So why does this not apply to my application? Regarding the lack of economic evidence to show no proven demand, I dispute this, as I provided economic evidence from several normal sources as well as from the industry itself. I have checked this with several experienced planners, and they confirm that the data I have submitted should be perfectly acceptable. I given more data than was required for the change of use approval for the old farmhouse in 2015. In the report to the committee, the case officer then stated the small size of the barn would be a valuable addition to housing stock, would reuse a heritage building and support local employment. With the demand for housing having significantly grown since the planning statement in 2015, why does this LPA not accept this still? The appeal inspector most likely would have said exactly the same, because in his decision notice, he says that the residential use for the stable block would, and I quote, increase the choice and supply of housing within this part of rural Devon, unquote, and would help preserve the historic setting and avoid the building falling into decay. As to a holiday let, the inspector states it would result in a very small benefit, if any, to the local economy. Given the huge demand for housing and the lack of demand for holiday lets, why is this current LPA not supportive of redundant buildings being used for residential purposes whenever the opportunity arises? Please support this change of use to Orchard Barn and help preserve our rural heritage whilst increasing the borough's housing stock, which it desperately needs.
Thank you very much. And well done for sticking to the time. Okay. Thank you for that. Right, questions from the committee to Mr. Peter Sainsbury. Councillor Moody.
I'm interested in what you've just said about supplying the information that the offer has said that is required. Would you like to expand on that?
Yes, I've given the normal sources of data that is required from having dealt with planning myself in the past, such as Visit Cornwall, Visit England, and a variety of other ones, as well as spoken to the industry, the chairman of the South East Cornwall Tourism Association, and as I say, I haven't got the full list of the other sources. Now, I would like to point out in this particular context, in addition to that being the normal source of information, and it's generic, it's not actually specifically, I concede, around Lifton, and the reason for that, because I researched this and I got someone else to research it on my behalf, is because there's no there's no specific information about villages anywhere in the country, let alone Lifton. So you've got to go for generic information, which is what Visit England, Visit Cornwall, and for example, there was if you want, I've got some of the sources here if you want me to find them.
I'm just curious of what your investigation has shown and the information.
Oh, right. Well, in terms of what came out of that, it was that there's an oversupply. Basically, in terms of the economics of it, right, they're saying that there's a substantial oversupply of existing holiday lets, and the occupancy rate for a place like Lifton, because we're not talking about St Ives, we're talking about Lifton, a mid-Devon place. It ranges from 30%, and I've got a planning application here from Bishop's Fitzbane, where the occupancy rate is 30%. The highest range, given the information I've had from the chairman of the South East Cornwall Tourism Association, would be 55%. So if you take an average between the two, you're below 50%. So that means that 50% of the year, you're going to be not even occupied. And not only does that mean that you're not getting an income from that, and of course that will be over the winter period, you're having to heat that building. You're having to look after it in the weather conditions that we all know we've got. So, and yet you're getting no income from it whatsoever. So equally, I also got an estimate as to, again, discussing with people in the industry, what their feedback was from visitors. The average spend per week of a visitor, because at the minute, as to be honest, everybody should know because it's on the TV and the media all the time, the trends for holiday use are such that the visitor is not spending anywhere near as much as he used to. And as a consequence, and a direct evidence of this, planners, is that you've got the Eden project making 83 people redundant this year.
I think we're sort of possibly drifting off the subject a bit.
No, this is to do with the economic...
No, we were after the specific information about this property, not the rest of Devon.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
No, it's relevant.
Yeah. Thank you very much. At least I know now what information you've supplied.
Well, can I just say one last thing then? I used to do loads of applications to central government, Heritage Lottery and Europe with a view to drawing down funds for Cornwall and West Devon, because the heritage works on the mine sites I was responsible for. I got millions of pounds of funding, and it was all based on the same sources of information I'm being told now is insufficient. In other words, generic information from the main economic data providers for our area.
Okay, thanks very much. I think you had a question, Councillor.
Just to confirm, it's set up as a 2-bed,
Yes.
not a 4-bed, because there is something in the figures that says size-wise it's 4, but it is a 2-bed.
It is 2-bed, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Councillor Mott.
Thank you. You've told us about the generic information that you've got for Cornwall, however it is in West Devon. Have you given any specific information regarding the property itself, which is what I believe is required by policy?
Well, as I said, I've given it not. You can remember, Lifton Down, it was within 3 miles of Cornwall. And the visitors, because I know...
With respect, so that we don't drift off topic again, can you answer the question of, have you given specific information with regarding the property itself, as opposed to generic information from Visit Cornwall, as required for our policy?
Right, Councillor, as I said earlier, I checked whether or not specific information was available from any of the economic data providers that exist, and there isn't any. It just doesn't. I said this earlier. There is no generic or specific information for any of the villages, no matter where you are in Devon. So I couldn't provide it because it doesn't exist.
I think we got the message. Thank you. I have one question. Has this property ever been advertised as a holiday let?
No, it hasn't. But I have researched into, and the reason for it is because before advertising, if you advertise, can I make this point very strongly? If you advertise, you are then one step from actually then getting someone in, aren't you? Right? The whole point of any economic statement or any economic business that you're having to seriously consider, you have to first do market research to see whether or not there's a viable market there in the first place. And
okay, I get the message. I just asked a simple question. Has it ever been advertised as a holiday let? The answer is no.
The market research, I'm just responding, as the market research has dictated that the market is not there to make it worthwhile. I don't want, who can actually market or present something to someone to actually holiday as a holiday let when you don't want actually to start the ball rolling if you can't sustain it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I've got the answer, and the answer was no, it never has been advertised as a holiday let. Councillor Leach.
One assumes that when you put in for planning permission to turn this into a holiday let, you must have had some data to show that it was going to be worthwhile.
Well, that's a reasonable question, but actually when I bought the property over 26 years ago, the planning permission had already been in place for several years. I didn't get the planning permission for resident. This is a very old planning permission, and that's another thing. We're talking about a totally different era for holiday letting compared with what we got now. As a competitor, you are now dealing with Airbnb. If you look at Lifton itself, those that got holiday lets like mine, but in other words, tied to a planning condition that is over almost 50 years old, nearly all of them are Airbnbs. And I've got someone down the road from me who now has got a redundant building, which can easily be converted to Airbnb. So, in addition to the normal pressures that a holiday, which, as I said, this is reflected in the fact that you're only getting occupancy rates at 30%, you've now got Airbnb on your doorstep, and anyone can start it.
Okay, thanks very much. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Is there any reason why you can't see me?
Oh, sorry, Councillor Reid.
Sort of sat directly opposite. Thank you very much. Are you the owner of the whole site?
Well, of the courtyard, I've got 3 out of the 4 buildings. The Mohay building is in someone else's ownership.
Okay, if you were to get planning permission, would you be happy with a condition that prevents you from selling this property separately?
Separate? How do you mean?
Separate to what the rest of what you own?
So I'd be prevented in selling the property, is that what you're saying?
Well, you'd be able to sell it provided you sold the whole site. That is a planning condition that is often applied to various sites.
But I would prefer to sell it individually, in all honesty.
I think that's a sort of hypothetical question rather than one associated.
Can we
with
ask for
planning
clarification from the planning officer on the status of such conditions, please?
So those conditions aren't before us. And in terms of the red line, no other buildings are in that red line. So we can't apply conditions that might apply to other buildings.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just for move on. Yes, in some circumstances you can use conditions to prevent the splitting up of buildings. I wouldn't, from what I've seen here, I don't think this would be a situation where you would normally impose it. It's normally where you've got where there would be harm caused if it went into a separate ownership. And I don't think there would be necessarily harm caused if it went into separate ownership. Our view is the harm in terms of the loss of the economic unit rather than impacts on the other properties already there.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Our next registered speaker is Councillor Measy from Lifton Parish Council. Welcome. And once again, 3 minutes to talk to the committee, and then the committee have an opportunity to ask you questions if they wish to. So
Okay,
when you're ready,
thank
off
you.
you go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm speaking today on behalf of Lifton Parish Council, which has reviewed this application carefully and has given the application our continued support. The Parish Council disagrees with the view that this property is isolated or that its use as a holiday let is viable. From a local perspective, this property is not isolated. It forms part of a small group of existing homes at Higher Carley, which lies a short distance from Lifton Down and about 2 kilometres from Lifton Village itself, both of which provide services and community facilities. The barn already benefits from planning consent for conversion and holiday use, so the principle of residential occupation is well established. Excuse me. In our view, allowing the building to be used as a permanent home would make sensible and sustainable use of a structure that already exists, thereby continuing to preserve part of the heritage of this part of Devon by giving the barn a new purpose. When Lifton Parish Council discussed this application, councillors felt that the applicant had provided fair and convincing evidence showing that there is no proven demand for the building as a holiday let. The Parish Council is also very aware of the local housing pressures facing our community. Small one-bedroom properties are in short supply, while the number of holiday lets has grown significantly in recent years. This proposal would therefore allow an existing building to be used in a way that supports local housing needs, providing a modest but valuable home, for someone wishing to live and work in the parish all year round. There are no objections from highways or other statutory consultees, nor were there any objections from local residents. In our view, the proposal would not create any harm to neighbours, the landscape or local character. We see this as a simple and positive proposal, turning an underused building into a small home that will contribute to the local housing stock and support the long-term sustainability of our community. So for these reasons, Lifton Parish Council continues to support the applicant and asks members to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, and again, well done for staying within your 3 minutes. Well rehearsed. Members of the committee, have you got questions for Councillor Measy? I have one. You said in your address there that the holiday lets in the area had grown in recent years, which rather contradicts the proposal that we've been led to believe that there is no demand for holiday lets.
Grown with Airbnb, yes. Whether they're being used as holiday lets, but there's one, personally speaking, just down the road from me that has been empty all year, although it is advertised as a holiday let.
Any other questions for Councillor Measy? Nope.
Excuse me?
Sorry, there was. Why do I miss your hand, Councillor Reid?
I don't know. I must
Can
be,
you raise it higher next time?
Shrinking violet's my problem, Mr. Chairman. Your parish council, are they strongly in favour, or was this a close call between you and the other councillors and the parish council?
It was no abstentions, no objections, complete. Everyone voted in favour of it, 8-0.
Okay. Any other questions? No hands up? Thank you, Councillor Meason.
Thank you.
Okay, our last registered speaker is Councillor Edmonds, who's the ward member. No stranger to this committee. And of course, he has, should he wish it, 5 minutes to address the committee. I may remind you that last time he somewhat trespassed on that time frame, so this time he won't.
You're extremely generous to me, Chair, and I'm grateful, but hopefully I've learned from that experience. So. Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm bringing this application back to members as I believe there are strong local reasons to challenge the recommendation for refusal, particularly regarding the site being considered as an unsustainable location and the evidence provided about the holiday let's viability. On the matter of isolation, the planning report concludes that the site is isolated under the interpretation of policy TTV 26 and relevant case law. However, I urge members to carefully consider the following. Orchard Barn is part of a clearly defined cluster of residential and converted agricultural buildings at Higher Carley. It is not a lone building in open countryside, but one of several properties forming a coherent group. The site is approximately 1.3 kilometres from Lifton Down and 2 kilometres from Lifton, both of which are accessible by road. While there may be no footway or street lighting along the route, this is not unusual in rural West Devon and does not, in my view, render the site isolated in a planning sense. As we have heard, the Parish Council, which knows the area well, has also confirmed that the barn is not isolated and supports the application. I believe the interpretation of isolation is overly rigid and does not reflect the reality of rural living in West Devon. The site is part of an established rural community, not a remote outpost. Members will be aware that whether a site is isolated or unsustainable is a matter of planning judgment. As decision makers, members are entitled to reach a different conclusion from the one set out in the planning report. Moving on to the viability of the holiday let, policy Dev 15 states, the loss of tourist or leisure development will only be permitted where there is no proven demand for the facility. The policy does not specify what level or type of evidence must be submitted. It simply requires a reasonable and proportionate demonstration. The applicant has submitted a range of evidence to demonstrate that the holiday let is no longer viable. While the report notes that some of this data is not site-specific, I would argue that expecting highly localized evidence in a rural context is unrealistic. The applicant has made a good faith effort to demonstrate broader market trends that are clearly affecting rural holiday accommodation. The barn has never been used as a holiday let since the current owner purchased it. It has remained empty, generating no economic benefit. In contrast, allowing its use as a permanent residence would contribute to local housing supply, particularly of smaller dwellings, which we know are in short supply in Lifton Parish. It is reasonable to conclude that the evidence provided meets the requirement of Dev 15, which only asks for reasonable proof that there is no proven demand. To require a full-scale market appraisal for a single one-bedroom unit would be disproportionate and goes beyond what Dev 15 intends. Turning now to the planning balance, the report acknowledges that the council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply and that paragraph 11D of the NPPF, the tilted balance, applies. In this context, the proposal would deliver a modest but meaningful contribution to local housing supply. It would bring a currently unused building into productive use. It would support the vitality of the local rural community. These benefits, in my view, significantly and demonstrably outweigh any perceived harm. So in conclusion, members, this is a modest, sensible proposal that makes good use of an existing building within a rural cluster. It aligns with the spirit of national policy to boost housing supply and support rural communities. I urge members to support the application and grant planning permission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. And thank you for keeping to time. Questions for Councillor Edmonds? Councillor Mott.
Can I confirm, please, Councillor, you said that it was a 1-bedroom property. I believe the application is for a 2-bedroom? Have clarification, please. My understanding was it was a 2-bedroom.
That's my error. If the applicant says 2, then that's an error on my part. Apologies.
I think the site plan actually showed two bedrooms and the.
Yeah, my apologies. Yeah.
Any other questions for Councillor Edmonds? Councillor Reid and then Councillor Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. On page 6 of the document, Councillor, you may not have in front of you, but it says key issues for consideration: principle of development, design, amenity, drainage, highways and biodiversity. Do you think there's any negative amongst any of those categories in this application?
Any negatives?
Yes.
I'm satisfied they're not.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Wakeham.
Is 1 bedroom still acceptable as a home office?
Sorry, Councillor Wakeham.
Is a bedroom, any bedroom, acceptable as a home office?
I would have said that, yes.
I'm just saying, because you're quibbling about 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, and often it's accepted that one of the bedrooms is a home office.
I think the application says it's 2 bedrooms and there are 2 bedrooms shown in the plan. So.
Yeah, so the applications come in with 2 bedrooms. But for the purposes of Dev 8, we would allow one of those as a home office. So we would class it as a 1-bed, but it could also be a 2-bed if required.
Any other questions for Councillor Edmonds? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, committee, we've heard from our 3 registered speakers. We've had the opportunity to question the planning officer and the registered speakers. So we're now in debate before we go to a vote. Anyone wish to speak about this application before we go further? Councillor Moody, then Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for the officer for a full and thorough report, and to all the speakers for their representations today. I recall this application coming before council before, and at that particular time I had a similar thought, that the barn has, in principle, already has residential use. And I would agree with Councillor Edmonds that this debate about rural isolated, because it is in, and I asked the question at the time, because it's in a cluster of buildings, I find it difficult to see it as being isolated. It is not a single building in the countryside. I also understand that there is a housing need under DEV 8 for rural properties, and that needs to be taken into consideration. And also, as Councillor Edmonds mentioned, the tilted balance caused by the not having the 5-year land supply, and paragraph 11D of the NPPF applies, that the presumption in favour of sustainable development is engaged. I also note the parish council report, and also going back to the whether it's isolated or not, it is at 3 kilometres from the village of Lifton. And there are no technical objections. It complies to design and amenity standards. And as a result, and given the information I've heard today and the arguments I've heard today, I would be not supporting the officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much. Who else? Councillor Mott. And then Councillor Jury.
Chair, I'm afraid I'm going to completely disagree with Councillor Moody on his summary of the application. I appreciate that when the original planning application was given for holiday lets, permissions were indifferent, but indeed, with respect to the applicant since then, planning reforms, planning policies have also changed significantly, which restricts development in isolated locations, which this is, albeit in a cluster with another house there. So that, as we've often been told, cluster of houses does not necessarily make it a hamlet or a sustainable location for further development. The applicant also mentioned Airbnb, which he has also failed to utilise himself. By not listing the property as being available for rent, either through a letting agency or through Airbnb, how would anybody be able to judge its desirability or not? In fact, without the information as requested by policy, which requires specific information and enabling the current owner to sell the property on the open market, should he have permission today, then I can't see any benefit really to anybody. It's not going to be affordable. It's in an isolated location, which would also lend to its inability to be affordable. And should members go against the officer recommendation, as I have been known to do before, it must be accompanied with valid material reasons. And as it stands, I can't see any. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jury.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everybody for their evidence and their thoughts. Probably like most of us around here, I'm feeling somewhat conflicted at the moment. I guess that's our lot as being part of this committee, the nature of what comes before us. On the one hand, I'm very aware of the housing crisis that we have, in particular the need for smaller residential units, and I think there's some evidence that perhaps smaller houses that in the past have been privately owned and let are now being let as Airbnbs, taking them out of the housing market. And I'm also mindful of the fact that this is not an application for a new build, that the property does exist in this location, and it clearly makes sense to find a use for this property that adds value to the community and to the economy. I think it's also a great shame that, as I understand it, this planning permission has existed since 1989, from looking at the notes, and there doesn't seem to have been any attempt ever to have let the property as a holiday let. And in my view, and I concur, I think, with Councillor Mott here, had there been a concerted effort to make this work as a business that had then not succeeded, in my view, that would have provided the evidence that we need in order to meet policy Dev 15 and the paragraph there. So I can see where everybody is coming from, and part of me thinks maybe there's a common sense solution, but I'm also mindful of the policies, and I think on balance, and very narrowly on balance, I would be coming down in support of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I actually think we are being encouraged to support the applicant here because the application accords with many policies Dev 1 to 2935, 21, 2023, Dev 10, 2632. So I think that in that balance, that tilts it towards approving the application. I can't accept that it is isolated as it is surrounded by other properties, and the applicant has proved that there is very little economic value as a holiday let, and it would be much more worthwhile to West Devon as a residential property.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to endorse Councillor Moody's comments, and also Councillor Jury next to me in saying that this property is something that can be of benefit to the community. I look at it on a fairly simplistic point of view in terms of planning in the context of what people in the community think. We have to deal with technical details, and that's our job, and we are supported by first-class officers giving us this detail. But at the end of the day, somebody locally, a young family or a middle-aged couple with late teenage children looking for them to remain in their community, living in a rural area myself up in the peninsula of Bear Ferrers, I understand that housing is always an issue. We have a housing crisis in the peninsula anyway, as is common across the area. I should be supporting I should be voting against the officer's recommendation, because I believe at the end of the day we have to think of the people rather than policy.
Thank you. Councillor Mott.
Apologies, I know technically we are in debate. Can I ask for clarification, please? Because should this property be offered on the open market, we have no guarantee that a local family would be able to, one, afford it or would desire to buy it. Should the vote go against the officer recommendation, would we be able to condition that it is affordable and therefore marketed at an affordable, i.e. Within a 106 or something, that it is therefore affordable and offered to locals before it goes on the open market?
I don't believe we've got a policy hook to enable us to do that. I think if the condition was lifted, it is a open market dwelling, could be used for any residential purpose. Wouldn't necessarily, we couldn't tie it down to be either a local person or affordable or even permanent residential. It could be a second home. There's no restriction.
Thank you.
Any other matters of debate? My own views, I have to say, coincide almost directly with those of Councillor Jury's. I shall be supporting this application, the officer's recommendation. So, are we?
Can I just make one point?
Easy.
I'm sorry, I don't think I can let this one slide. With the greatest respect of Councillor Reid, the lawful position in terms of dealing with planning applications is planning applications should be determined in accordance with the development plan policy. So it is policy that has to come first, not, I think you said, I put people before policy. Lawfully, you need to be putting policy first, because that's the legal framework for dealing applications. Apologies.
I accept that comment, and of course policy is written in law. At the end of the day, we are dealing with people. Policy in isolation is of no benefit to the community.
Councillor Guthrie.
I'd just like to highlight and agree with everybody that there's some conflict here, and I think if there were such a thing as a condition, it would be an easy yes for everybody. But I think equally, and it's very recent history that we should be looking at, there is across the board regarding everything a housing shortage, and smaller properties, whether they're genuinely affordable or at least possibly affordable, and they're not 4-bed houses, they're not big 3-bed houses. We need them. We're talking all the time about carbon footprints, this, that and the other. Much better to be utilising a building that exists than building another building somewhere else. So I would unfortunately not be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Okay, any more debate? We've had a good debate.
Just one last thing, please, Chair. Yes, I'd like to comment on the submission by Mr. Sainsbury when he quoted the status in other parts of the countryside, whether it be in Cornwall or Devon or elsewhere as regards policy, and the fact that at a previous appeal, the appeal was overturned by the higher authority because it was deemed in that case. I can't remember exactly how he worded it, but we need to take into account that wider context as part of our planning policy issues. Thank you.
Okay. Final call for any comments before we... Okay, so I move the recommendation, the officer's recommendation, which is for refusal. Can I have a seconder for that, please? That doesn't indicate how you might choose to vote. It just moves the recommendation to a vote.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. So the officer's recommendation in front of us is for refusal. Those members in favour of supporting the officer's recommendation, i.e. refusing this application, please show. 5.
6, Chair. 4.
Sorry. The application is, the officer's recommendation is supported, the application is refused. Thank you. And thank you for such a lively debate. And I fully understand the sort of passion on both sides of the argument, if I can put it that way. Right, our next application is application 227125, Sandy Lane Barn Annex. And just before I go to the officer's report, we've got 13 minutes before 11 o'clock. You want to start your presentation? We'll have a break. We'll be back here at 2 minutes to 11 at the absolute latest. We'll then do the 2-minute silence. We'll then have the officer's report.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're now on to the second of the two applications for today, which is 227125 Full, Sandy Lane Barn, Kilworthy Road, Tavistock, subject of the site visit for those that were able to attend. I'll now hand over to the planning officer for her report.
Okay, let me just wake my computer up. Okay, so this is an application to extend and alter the existing annex. Just to show you a site aerial view, I know a lot of you attended the site visit last week, so you know where you are. So the site's identified with a yellow hexagon relative to Tavistock to the south. This is the site location map. So you've got the existing dwelling in the southwest corner. You've got the annex itself, more in the middle, and then to the north you've got the access out onto the highway. And this is just a site aerial view. The existing site plan shows the dwelling and the annex. The large grey, or the large dark grey shapes, those are sort of decked areas that are already existing. This is the proposed site plan, so you can't see them too clearly, but there are some parking spaces that are dashed within the white area, and the annex is the larger of the black squares to the north of the image. So this is the existing floor plans and the elevations, and it shows that the building is currently used as an annex, but was originally designed as a garage and store, so that's why it looks as it does. This is the proposed floor plans and also the roof plan. The proposed elevations, just showing the different treatments in terms of materials. You can see the dormer and the extension. So the sections, I think, are to scale, so those are shown in the top half, but the massing views are shown as not to scale. So those are just for kind of general context, but you can't rely on those as they're not to scale. So the key issues, these are summarised from the report, which I'm sure that you've all had a chance to read by now. So when considered in the round, the annex comprises a functionally self-contained unit of accommodation, and it's at a scale that would challenge the primacy of the host dwelling as the dominant feature of the site. And on that basis, the proposal would result in the creation of a new dwelling in an unsustainable countryside location, and there isn't a specific identified need for it being there. And that means that travel to and from the site would be most likely by the private car, and that would undermine the transition to a low-carbon future. And then we also have concerns in terms of the scale massing, design and materials, as well as the scheme of fenestration that has resulted in a poorly composed scheme, again, that appears overly dominant within the site, diminishing the host dwelling as that dominant feature. And then there's a holding reason that no mitigation has been provided for the recreational impacts on the Tamar Estuaries European Marine Site. That's a standard sort of technical reason for refusal, and that's normally addressed through submission of a unilateral undertaking. We haven't asked the applicant for that because we were otherwise proceeding to a refusal, and that is the officer recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for a very comprehensive report too. Members of the committee, questions for the planning officer, please. No? No? Okay, we have one registered speaker, Mr. Liam Chammings, who is the agent. Welcome to the committee. You have 3 minutes to say what you wish to the committee, and then the committee have an opportunity to ask you questions on that. So when you're ready, off you go.
The rationale for this application is purely for the betterment of the existing annex, and it is to lead with a fabric-first approach. The existing dwelling is limited spatially, and the applicant's children have used this existing annex, the existing building, under lawful use as ancillary overnight accommodation for some period of time. A planning condition, I believe, could limit the type of occupancy to ensure a continuation of the current ancillary use and use by members of the main dwelling only. Despite the lawful use, the fourth reason for refusal, or the technical matter that was just referred to, is purely a trigger from the criteria assessment of a new dwelling rather than an annex. The annex versus new dwelling criteria is a point that I wish you all to debate today. In relation to the other reasons of refusal, 11.86 of the SPD, which relates to extension, scale and design, states that an extension may be considered appropriate if it does not increase the internal floor space by more than 50%. The proposed increase to the floor area for the annex is below this at less than 30%. In response to the case officer's concern at the large scale relative to the host dwelling, the ridge of the existing annex is around 180 millimetres below that of the main dwelling. This is around 7 inches. Proposed works would maintain this lower ridge. The main takeaway here, in the context of dominance, is that the annex remains smaller in floor area and lower in height than the existing dwelling. In terms of the materials, the metal and timber board is a direct reference to the materials consented to the replacement agricultural building to the north of the site only 13 months ago. In their report for the northern building, it was stated that officers consider that the material palette is appropriate. Whilst the material choice here may be contemporary, it remains aligned with the consented building to the north. It also allows the opportunity to lead with a fabric-first approach. This approach aims to reduce the water ingress into the building from the wind-driven rain, improve air tightness, improve thermal comfort, and to contribute to improved thermal efficiency and the energy demand of the building. The building principles drive the timber overclad and replacement roof that has been proposed. The SPD under 11.107 includes timber as an acceptable material and notes its historical use within the town. Furthermore, 11.108 states it is not necessary to replicate urban form of the past, but to take inspiration from. The same paragraph within the SPD also states that the fabric first principle should be applied and weight is given in the SPD to this approach. Despite the existing lawful annex use, the annex versus dwelling criteria remains a key part of the case officer's assessment. I do have some of the concerns over the points raised within this criteria, as some points have been made rightly on their merits of the application, while others have been given weight to the what-ifs or potential of future actions to the site, which includes amenity, parking and access. However, I believe that all applications should be considered on their merits.
If I ask you to summarise up now.
I'm done. That's fine. Yeah, it'll be too long. It'll go over. It was tight anyway, so
thank you very
very
much.
close to 3 minutes. So
okay, members of the committee, questions for Mr. Jannings, Councillor Mott, and then Councillor Jury, Councillor Moody.
Can I clarify, please, because you say about the floor space of the annex, but surely the annex itself as an annex to the main dwelling is effectively an increase in size on the main dwelling, so therefore a further extension to that annex would be an even bigger increase. Your implication is that the extension is only a minor increase in floor space, but I could argue that with the annex that's already doubled the living space of the main dwelling, and an extension on top of that is only further adding to that increase.
yeah, I think to clarify that comment, in terms of if you take inhabitable floor area for the dwelling, which I believe is somewhere around 90 square metres internal floor area, and then did the same for the annex separately, in terms of the two, the dwelling would still be larger. That's the clarity there. But I see your point in terms of it's a combined cumulative figure already. I didn't split it that way. I split it as, i.e. separate, because the comments were in context of the annex being the dominant feature on site and it then competing with the dwelling. But I don't see how it can compete when the ridge is lower and as an isolated building, it is smaller in its footprint. It is therefore not the dominant element.
I'll come back to the officer with that question later, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we see where both sides of the argument are going, but it's a question of whether the annex is itself an extension to the original building, and this is an extension on the extension, or whether it should be considered a self-contained building. Yeah, something to think about. Councillor Jury.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your explanation. And you spoke very eloquently about the merits of the annex and the criteria related to the annex. Given the, as I see it, clarity of those criteria within the policies, was there anything that you had previously thought about doing differently in terms of your plans in order to make that distinction absolutely clear in your proposal?
In terms of the criteria, sorry, purely on criteria?
Yeah.
Fundamentally, it's an existing building. It's not a new annex. We're not trying to create a new annex. It's got lawful use. Yeah, and to be honest, and before the applicant purchased the site, that was never actually, it never functioned as a garage. It was built as a garage. It looks like a garage, but from day dot, it was used as an annex, unlawfully. However, I think it was 2017, which I'm happy to be corrected on. That's when the certificate of lawfulness for its use was then implicated. So as far as I'm concerned, it's always an annex. And I don't feel that the criteria of testing it, one element of, is it joined to the building? Well, it's an existing building. We can't now join it because, from my point of view, that would create more harm. So it can't function on some of the criteria.
Thank you. I think I was specifically thinking more about the elements such as kitchen, bathroom, separate deck, those sort of aspects which I can appreciate add character and usefulness to the building, but nevertheless are part of the criteria that we perhaps need to consider.
So sorry if I misunderstood there, but the existing deck is there and it always has been there. So that's an existing element. I wouldn't, it's not very honest if it's an existing element to then remove it from your drawings, both existing and proposed, because that's slightly deceitful. The bathroom's always been there on the ground floor, on the top left corner there. It's only the kitchen that's obviously been introduced as part of the single story extension, and that's purely a response to the limitations of the dwelling, because the kitchen in the dwelling itself, by virtue of it being a conversion, is not overly spacious and it doesn't suit contemporary family living.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Moody, you had a question?
Councillor
Reid next.
Yes, I was going to raise the issue about the deck that Councillor Jory was incorrect, that it is a pre-existing deck. My question is about one of the reasons for this proposal is to comply with building regulations. I'm just a little curious at what has happened with building regs between the conversion from the garage to accommodation and now, and going forward. I presume that building reg would be involved in this application?
Definitely. I mean, the whole Fabric First approach is obviously, energy efficiency, reducing energy demand, thermal efficiency, which obviously relates directly to Part L of building regs. And I can't obviously give weight fully to Part L because it's building regs, it's not planning policy. But it provides a significant upgrade of an existing building. And the savings on that and the energy demand reductions would be significant. There obviously is, as I highlighted, water ingress, which is an issue given the exposed location. You're always going to have wind-driven rain. And the nature of the building materials there that have been used don't lend themselves, unfortunately, to modern day living in an exposed location.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned about the need to debate two conflicting issues. Could you just repeat that and, if necessary, expand upon it so I have a clear idea of what your thesis is?
So I believe, and again, happy to be corrected, but I believe it's Appendix 1 of the SPD, and it's the criteria of annex versus dwelling, which I understand is there a potential, or is the test, I understand it's the test to whether it's an annex, but my argument is there's some points in there that have been considered on its merits for what it is, and there's other points in there that is the potential actions, i.e. there's a suggestion, and I'm not directly quoting, that there's the potential for a separate access to be created at some time. There is ample space on site for separation of parking. Unfortunately, we're dealing with an existing building and a large site. We can't control that, and the applicant shouldn't be penalised based on the size of their site for the potential of this being a dwelling or not. Even more so that it's an existing annex under existing lawful use.
Okay, planning officer would like a word.
I'd just like to clarify something from the officer's point of view, but I wanted to do it while the speaker was still there, so I didn't. So if members have a question for him, it doesn't disadvantage him that he's already left the floor. In response to that question, as far as I'm concerned, don't dispute, absolutely don't dispute, there's a certificate for an annex. In my mind, that certificate is generally an annex because it doesn't contain all the facilities to enable day-to-day, independent day-to-day living, which goes back a long time for the Gresham test and the Court of Appeal. What this application provides a kitchen, so it then has living room, bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, so it then does provide everything you'd need for an independent living, independent dwelling house. And we feel that's what tips the balance from being an annex to, you can call it annex, but in effect is a separate dwelling because it contains all the facilities for day-to-day existence. I think that's the difference between the officer position and the applicant's position. I just thought it would be useful to clarify that point.
Add something there. This isn't in the officer's report, and obviously, and I've got full respect for the officer, and there's always great communication throughout the process. But I was told that, and this is an indirect quote, that the presence of the kitchen alone is not what has prompted this. So if the kitchen was there or not there, the same would apply. That's what I was told.
Councillor Mott, and then Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Can I have clarity, please? Because you mentioned about the extension things needed to comply with building regulations. Could that not be done anyway without the extension?
You can upgrade and retrofit the existing building. Absolutely. You could overclad it, but it would be the same materials. I don't feel it's the dormer. I don't feel like it's the extension, the single-story extension that's at issue here. The extension could not be there, yes, if that's the question that I'm being asked. You can upgrade the existing building. You can reduce the issues of water ingress. You can firmly upgrade it without the need of the extension being there, yes.
Happy? Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Yeah, can I ask our officer with regards to this definition of an annex, is there a definition within our policies that clearly states the amount of facilities within an annex as against a real building, as against a main residence? Is there any reason why an annex cannot replicate some of the issues or some of the facilities that would be available in the main building?
I'm sure there is a definition, but I couldn't quote it off the top of my head, hence we'll look for it.
Whilst we have the officer's attention, I just wanted to know, excuse me, the certificate of lawfulness, as I understand it, was for a residential unit. And I am not aware that a residential unit would not have washing facilities or cooking facilities.
So the planning history I've got was a certificate of lawfulness for existing building as residential annex. And it very specifically uses that word.
Residential? Yeah.
An annex in which people can
reside.
Sleep.
Legally. Yeah. To me, that would mean with washing facilities, toilet, and cooking facilities.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I would question why the unit needs two kitchens, one in the house and one in the annex, but that's a different matter. Councillor Guthrie.
Just on modern trends of daily life and looking at some of us around the table, that are at least over 50. There's a lot more context, I think, in planning to consider about multi-generational living and in co-housing principles across the country, and having the ability to potentially have older folk living with you. Then generally you'll find that an annex will have bathing and kitchen facilities. So I would just like to point that out, that a lot of people have an annex that their elderly relatives can live in. And in this case, that it's the opposite. They've got younger relatives, their children in there. But if you go up into the space, and I'll move on to a second point in a minute, it's clear that you really do need to alter the roof line to enable it to probably have a sort of current building reg space height, etc., because it's very cramped. Just to add on to that, I would like to say for myself that if the overarching view of the site, and if you go and visit it, retains that size of both parts of the extension, I think it's harder to justify it as being subservient to the main building. So I just think that's important to think about. Thank you.
Question.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions for Mr. Jammings? Oh, there's an answer about annexes for Councillor Reid.
Just anecdotally from Councillor Guthrie's perspective, actually there were a significant number of applications for then granny annexes in the, from my experience, in the late 90s, late 80s, early 90s, that then seems to have disappeared. But it's so trends seem to be repeating themselves as. So paragraph 4.129 of the Council's SPD, and I'll just read the whole paragraph. In respect of residential annexes, ancillary relates to the use and degree of dependence on the main dwelling, not the physical attachment or design appearance of the annex. Each case is likely to be different in terms of its built form, but brackets attached or severed, but the level of dependence will be consistently considered by LPAs based on criteria set out below. Annexes that demonstrate little dependence, i.e. are self-contained of the main dwelling and appear effectively to be proposals for a new dwelling, will likely be refused planning permission. So I think you can take from that whether we consider it to be an annex or not is the level of ancillary use, and if it is in effect a self-contained unit, the policy is we would not, or the guidance is we would not accept it as an annex.
Are there any more sub-clauses in that section you're reading out that may influence that first comment?
Okay, I'll carry on reading. It's page 55 of the SPD, if anybody's got it in front of them. When considering whether an extension or outbuilding is capable of being occupied independently of the main dwelling, LPAs will have local planning authorities, because the SPD relates to 3 different local authorities, will have regard to its relationship to the main dwelling and the extent to which facilities such as bathrooms, kitchens, toilets are shared. The LPAs will normally expect an annex to, and then I think this is in the report, be an extension to the existing dwelling or an outbuilding, be functionally related to the main dwelling, be used in conjunction with the main dwelling, be in the same ownership, be accessed via the main dwelling or its garden, be reliant on facilities and floor space provided by the main dwelling such that it cannot be occupied completely independently, share a garden or outdoor amenity space, be designed in such a way to easily allow the annex to be used as an integral part of the main dwelling at a later date. I think that probably is the bit. Okay.
Okay. Somewhat drifted off questions directly for the agent, but are there any other questions from Mr. Jammings at this stage? No? Thank you very much. There were no other registered speakers, so we've had an opportunity to question the agent, question the planning officer. We're now in debate before going to a vote. So, members, have we anything you wish to raise in debate? Councillor Mott.
I think it's made perfectly clear within the report on page 21 and 22 the reasons why we should be supporting the officer recommendation.
Thank you. Any other comments, Councillor Jury?
Thank you, Chair. I wonder whether it's also fair to say if we were to look at the other side of this particular coin, as it were, I agree with Councillor Mott that the criteria and the reasons we should be looking at for an application as an annex are on page 21 and 22 of the report. The report was very effective and complete. Thank you for that. If we were to be sat here considering an application for this to be a separate dwelling, which I know we're not, and I think there would be very little likelihood that we would approve that. Is that fair to say?
Thank you. Councillor Moody.
Are we waiting for an answer for that?
I thought you'd finished.
Kind of raising within my debate a little question that if we were hypothetically to be looking at this as an application for a separate dwelling, my view is that the recommendation for that would be to refuse.
Indeed. Okay. Councillor Moody. And then Councillor Guthrie.
Was there an answer? All right, okay. Thank you, Chair. And thank you to officers and to the speaker today. It was interesting to look at the site visit, and in my mind, what was read out by the planning officer about annexes and what they entail would be if they weren't pre-existing, if it was for a new application, similar to Councillor Jury's concern. And because it has legal right as a residence, a residential unit, I think to impose that particular interpretation of the SPD would be incorrect because it's a pre-existing building. Because there already is a shower, a bathroom in it and a kitchen in the unit itself. So that's that to one side. I also believe that the proposed extension, as the applicant said, it's something that I thought myself, was that under TTV 29, that it is far less than 50% of the floor space. The dormer is essential to comply with building regs, and is subservient to that dwelling, to that building, because it's below the ridge height. The extension is single story. Were it double story, I could see an argument about massing. The fact that the single story is a smaller unit, it still, for me, it doesn't over-dominate the site. The interesting thing also is that the applicant's agent mentioned that the cladding material was acceptable on another building on the same site. So I don't see that should be a problem. I think that the site is screened from the road. It's sustainable. It will provide PV cells, EV charging, and will comply to DV 32, the climate emergency compliance. And as a result of the fact that it is for domestic use, ancillary to the main dwelling for the family, I would not support the officer's recommendation. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Guthrie.
Just for the sake of clarity for this and other sites, in terms of having a sustainable location, how far are we talking about? Because I went to the site visit and it's pretty close to the centre of Tavistock. So we had this before where there was a big site put in by the Kelly College, and it was deemed that there couldn't be affordable housing there because it was not a sustainable location. And I mean, it would take anybody 10 minutes max to walk into the centre of Tavistock. So I think the way we apply sustainable location definitely needs thinking about. The other thing that was the gentleman who's the agent stated that there could be a unilateral undertaking to ensure that it wasn't able to be sold as a separate dwelling. So in our previous discussions, we were saying it wasn't easy to put in a condition like that. So I just wanted to bring that up and would like clarity.
Just further to that, I think that it could be conditioned that the ancillary use would be in perpetuity with the main dwelling and would never be let, sold, leased or otherwise disposed, so that it is retained as an annex. Because I have seen other annexes around Tavistock, because of lack of enforcement, have been turned into separate dwellings. So, so I have some experience over quite a few years about other developments that have occurred around the West Devon area.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to be clear, for everybody to be clear about.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, can I ask the planning officers these definitions on annexes? You instantly enough mentioned granny annexes, which clearly is saying those who are getting older day by day. Do you think when they wrote these policies, they actually had such types of dwelling in mind as an annex? Do you think that somebody who's an elderly person but independent of mind wouldn't want to be in an annex close to their family and yet at the same time have all the facilities so they can make themselves a cup of tea or a slice of toast, etc.?
For as long as I've been doing this job, we've had applications for annexes, and then historically they used to be, I've been doing this for a while now, they used to be for elderly relatives because the housing market was in a slightly different position than it is now. But I think over the last 10 years, 10, 12 years perhaps, the applications for annexes aren't necessarily just for that. They're a combination of elderly relatives, older teenage children who almost certainly can't afford to get their own independent property. Some people try to use annexes as holiday lets just to supplement income. So I don't believe the policy was written with a specific cohort in mind, because the policy is relatively modern. It certainly doesn't go back to the time where in my experience applications were just coming in for annexes. So I don't think there was a specific cohort in mind. If I can, if you indulge me a second, Councillor Moody's suggestion of a condition, you can't use a condition to restrict who can sell what. As the agent has said, it would have to be through a legal agreement. You can't do it by condition. And I've got a fundamental problem with conditioning a building such as this as ancillary use, because you're effectively approving what is in itself a separate unit as ancillary use. So as soon as it's occupied, I think they're in breach of that condition, because it's no longer being used ancillary, because it's capable of being, someone could live in there permanently without using the house in any way, shape or form. And that is where, and again, Councillor Moody referred to it, that is where we quite often end up in certificate situations where we've approved something for ancillary, we haven't got the capacity every couple of years to go knocking on the door saying, are you still using this ancillary basis? And then we do get the certificate saying this is how it's been used. So hopefully that's addressed those questions.
Thank you. Are there any other matters of debate before we move to a vote? No? Okay, well, the officer's recommendation is for refusal. Can I have a seconder for that proposal, please? Thank you, Councillor Mott. So we now move to the vote. and the officer's recommendation is for refusal. So those in favour of the officer's recommendation, which is for refusal of this application, please show.
Chair.
And those against the officer's recommendation? 1, 2, 3. Those abstaining? 1 abstention. So the application is refused. Okay, thank you very much for that. We now move on to planning appeals update.
Because Brian was here anyway, and she's the case officer of the vast majority of the reports, I'm afraid I gave her the hospital pass of summarising the first 4.
Given the fact she's suffering from a cold, that was very generous of you.
Okay, so this one is a single dwelling in Holbrook Lane, Exbourne, and the appeal was to... So the applicant had applied for 1 detached dwelling with a garage, and what they were trying to do through this application was address a previous refusal for a similar scheme on the site. So this one was refused in terms of the size of the dwelling, both in terms of the number of bedrooms provided and the floor space. We said that it didn't meet local need and it made inefficient use of land on the site. We were also concerned about the visual impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area. We also were advised by the highways team that there was inadequate visibility when exiting the site, so they would essentially pull out into traffic they couldn't see into. And we were also concerned that they hadn't provided their biodiversity net gain on site. So the inspector dismissed the appeal on the basis that the dwelling would harm the character and appearance of the conservation area and that the access arrangements were unsafe. The inspector was quite happy that the applicant could have got off-site biodiversity credits and didn't uphold our concerns relating to the size of the dwelling. Okay, the next one, another appeal dismissed, was the bungalow in Ingley Green, Broadwood, Kelly. So just to show you, if any of you are familiar with the area, it's sort of on the diffuse edge of Ingley as you leave. There is an existing bungalow on the site. It's very much had its time, and the local planning authority do accept that there will need to be some kind of replacement, but we couldn't accept the scheme that they'd come in with. So just to show you, this is the existing building. And this is what the applicant had proposed. So in terms of replacement, it was much bigger than the original dwelling and again wouldn't meet local need. We considered it to be unduly visually prominent from the public realm. There was also some recent tree felling at the site that hadn't been mitigated. And the applicant hadn't provided enough information in terms of the demolition and rebuild. So they hadn't demonstrated that the carbon impacts of demolition and rebuild could be addressed by the new dwelling. The appeal was dismissed in terms of it would have a harmful visual impact. That is the main reason. The inspector considered that the trees could have been controlled by condition. The inspector was happy with the DEV 32 information, and the inspector was happy that a larger dwelling could have been provided on the site. The next one you will all be familiar with. It's passed, because we're now in Hatherley. This is the micro-energy storage facility that was called to committee. I think most of you will remember that one. So officers recommended approval and committee went with a refusal. on the basis that the micro storage facility would harm the entrance to Hatherley. The appeal was allowed by the inspector. The inspector didn't find that the proposal had a harmful visual impact, as they'd be screened by the fenced compound with some landscaping and just the general width of the road and the sense of spaciousness locally. Now, I know that a lot of members were concerned about fire safety, and obviously officers had recommended a pre-commencement condition in terms of a fire safety management plan, and the inspectorate did impose that condition, so that's been put in place. Yes.
Just before we go on to the last appeal, given that it was a committee decision, is there any queries, questions from members before we go on to the next one?
So this is one where the appeal was allowed by the inspectorate. We're up in Folly Gate, just on the edge. So they had an existing former agricultural barn that had currently been used for a bit of storage, and they wanted to convert this one into an annex. Officers refused on the basis that, again, the accommodation was an entirely self-contained dwelling, and that the conversion itself would erode the historic character of the barn. The applicant didn't provide enough information for surface water drainage, foul drainage, and with the DEV 32 low carbon. The inspectorate didn't uphold those reasons. The inspector didn't conclude it was a new dwelling, or that it would have a harmful impact on the heritage value of the building. They considered that surface and foul drainage could be dealt with by pre-commencement condition, and the inspector stated that as it was a conversion, they'd met their DEV 32 obligations. That's just to show you the building. And then, oh, yes. Oh, okay. That's okay, you can carry on.
This appeal was allowed, and it's just to juxtapose our last decision where we weren't allowing an ancillary that already had domestic. So I'm just interested in the fact that this appeal was allowed, and it's got obviously everything that is required and is a far more substantial building.
There's been quite a lot, as you wouldn't be surprised to know, there's been quite a lot of discussion in respect of the recommendation on the previous application and this appeal decision. But we have got other appeal decisions that have gone the other way. I think my personal view is I think it's a poor decision. I think the inspector has completely ignored the SPD and policy. If we get another one that follows this line, then I think we would then have to revisit our interpretation of policy. But I'm not comfortable revisiting it on the basis of a single appeal. I'd want at least one more before we started going that line. But yeah, we've had an awful lot of discussion before the agenda was published, knowing that decision was there, and clearly we're not hiding from the fact they'll both be on the same agenda. So what you're making is a very valid point.
Okay, and finally, another appeal dismissed in Oakhampton. So this one is in the conservation area of Oakhampton, and the applicant had applied to remove a boundary wall, create an area of hard standing to provide a parking space, and they wanted the parking space for a disabled person. The officer refused the application on the basis that the boundary walls made a positive contribution to the character and appearance of the conservation area, and that the applicant could have applied for an on-street disabled parking space that would have provided the same facility for the applicant. and the inspector upheld that on the basis that the harm to the conservation area was not outweighed by public benefits.
Was that application in a conservation area or historical setting? So there were damage to the historic front wall. Yeah.
It was in the conservation area,
yeah.
And I think this is a really good decision. I think the inspectors look really carefully. If you read through the appeal decision, the inspector's gone quite carefully looking at the character of the area and distinguishing one side and the other and saying that this really would have a significant harm to the special characteristics of the conservation area. So yeah, it was a very good decision.
This has happened quite a few times in Tavistock, in the Tavistock conservation area. I'll talk to you later about another one that went backwards as well.
Yep, that's the end.
Thank you very much. So we move on to undetermined major applications, which we take by exception.
Chair, I owe the committee an apology. I remembered far too late that I had specifically agreed that I would talk to the officers of the 4 applications where there are Section 106 agreements and get a more detailed, up-to-date position on where those 106 agreements were. I'm afraid that completely slipped off my radar. I forgot to write it down, and I haven't done it, which I sincerely apologise, and I'll make sure that there is a full report on those 4 applications at the next meeting. I humbly apologise.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. I won't put the legal officer on the spot to respond with an update on those. I won't. We're glad to know. Right, anyone else want to bring up any? There is commentary on in red on the state of these. Some of them I know have been dragged for a long time, and that's why we wanted an update on the 106s to see if we could put those ones to bed. Any other comments on those? Okay. Thank you for that. So we've now covered the development management part of the meeting, and we move on to the licensing part of the meeting. And Naomi's waiting in the wings there to take the final item on the agenda, which is a review of the statement of licensing policy. This comes to us as the committee that sort of looks at this in some detail before it goes to full council for approval. So we are not here today approving it. We're here today polishing it, if I could put it that way, so that when it goes to full committee, it goes through, hopefully, with the minimum of fuss. So over to Naomi to take us through the report.
Thank you, Chair. So it is a requirement that we have under the Licensing Act to review the statement of licensing policy at least every 5 years. Our current policy came into effect in January 2021, so it needs to be updated before January 2026. The purpose of the policy is to assist the licensing authority when making decisions and to provide advice and clarity to applicants, business owners and local residents. The proposed draft policy showing all the track changes from the current policy is at Annex A of your papers. Many of the amendments reflect changes in legislation or statutory guidance, and then other changes include some new sections relating to violence against women and girls and drink and needle spiking. The new sections and any amendments are highlighted in red in the track changes. Part of the process of reviewing the policy involves undertaking a public consultation on the draft policy. So that is with all members of the public, local businesses, responsible authorities, as well as organisations that have an interest in licensing issues. The consultation ran from the 24th of July to the 30th of September this year, and a list of those that we consulted is at Appendix D of the licensing policy document. And then the responses we have received are at Annex B of your papers. As you'll see, we've reviewed the responses and have made some amendments to the policy where appropriate, as we've detailed in Annex B. and these amendments have already been included in the draft policy at Annex A. This is a final opportunity for any further additions or amendments to the policy to be made if necessary, and at which point you are satisfied, we would be grateful if you could then recommend that the policy is adopted by the full council at their meeting in December.
It's a very well put together report, very usefully sets out the changes in red so we can see where the different changes are. Questions from the committee? I have one or two, and one of them is absolute nitpicking, I have to say, but it does demonstrate that I have actually read the report. If I can find it. Para 2.5.9, which is a new, in red one, as it were. I read that 2 or 3 times, and I quite get my mind round what it was saying. It says that incorrect or insufficient planning permission is not an acceptable reason for an objection to a premises licence application. So there appears to be, so we don't take that into account when we're granting a licence, the fact that they haven't got planning permission for the activity that we're licensing. That doesn't sound logical to me.
Yes, that is correct. So we are unable under the Licensing Act to take into account anything other than the 4 licensing objectives. A person would need the correct planning permission to carry out that activity. They would also need the licence as well, so they need both in place. But the fact that they haven't got one before the other doesn't allow us to refuse the other, if you see. So it'd be the same for planning. They wouldn't be able to refuse planning permission to change premises into, say, a pub before they got their premises licence in place. They just would advise you need both in place before you can.
So we could prevent the activity because they didn't have planning for it, right, even though they had a licence to do it.
Yeah, it doesn't automatically give them the right to do it.
Okay.
It's similar to planning and building regs. You couldn't refuse planning permission because they haven't got building regs. They're mutually exclusive. They cover the same sort of things. They're mutually exclusive in the same way. Naomi was absolutely spot on. We couldn't refuse planning permission because they haven't got a licence, but they would need to do 2 different. Okay. They need to do both, and they're both. I mean, I think enforced by different parts.
It might just warrant a little comment in there saying you need both, as it were, in order to carry out the activity.
Okay, yes, I'll review that and see if we can add just that extra clarification.
The other one I had, and this really is delving down into unnecessary weeds, but on 1.9.7, you talk about the council's 8 key priorities, and I counted them, and there are 9 there. Unless health and well-being is one, which it may well be. But economy and jobs, you just count 1 as economy. And
well, I think
people
I'll double check that corporately in how many we have decided there are.
You see where I'm coming from. I'm sorry to do this to you.
I don't know. I don't know how it's. Yeah, they're categorised, whether they're categorised as 1 or 2. But I will double check that and make sure.
It must be some wiring in my brain. When everyone says there's 8 things, I count them, and if there aren't 8 things, I
will. Yeah, I will double check.
The final one, the final, not a question, almost just an observation, is within the document. One of the newer bits of the document is about delivery drivers, and particularly people delivering alcohol, and the responsibilities where those responsibility lies of within the licensing regime of making sure that the right sort of people are doing the right sort of thing. And I just wondered how on earth that is actually acted on in practice when you've got a supermarket that will be delivering not only to in West Devon, but South Hams, goodness knows where. We can't police the quality of the delivery drivers or what they're delivering and who they're delivering it to. Who does?
Correct, and that's why it was highlighted by Public Health in their document that it's a major concern, especially as it's becoming a lot more popular for people to have, say, like Deliveroo or those kind of people to go and pick it up for them, and at all times of the day and night. So that has been highlighted as a real issue. It's probably something that does need to be looked at as kind of like a national problem, because obviously it's not just a West Devon or a Devon issue. We can request that people put conditions on their licences that if it is a delivery they're doing, that they have to make sure that the delivery driver is performing ID checks before leaving with whoever they're leaving it with and that kind of thing. But like you say, practically, day to day, it's very difficult for us to make checks, and you can't go and do an inspection in a way you can in a pub,
I came to the
etc.,
conclusion
so
that we
it is tricky.
can't possibly police it. Because,
people
there
to
are
do.
national delivery companies.
Yeah.
But if we've got it written into our legislation that care must be taken by the provider, then there's something to hang some prosecution on should something go wrong. But I mean, it's mopping up after the problem rather than preventing the problem in the first place.
Possibly would be, yeah. So if we were to become aware that a particular business or operator had been doing deliveries very irresponsibly, then that's when we could potentially take action. But yeah, it is difficult to monitor it day to day.
And I think there's a thread throughout the document, and no criticism of the document at all, but there's a thread throughout the document that somebody needs to be responsible for quite a few things, but it's jolly difficult to put your finger on how that responsibility is exercised. Just a comment that I turn that into a question. Any other comments from members of the committee? No? Well, congratulations on such a comprehensive report and very well put together, and we'll look forward to that being ratified at full council in December.
Yeah.
Do we have to vote on that?
Councillor Moody.
Do we have to vote on that?
Well, a show of approval for the document as it stands with the modifications suggested. Okay, thank you. Okay, just before we draw the meeting to a close, over the last, about a couple of weeks ago, I was sent a document by a developer to try and explain the difficulty they had meeting the affordable homes criteria. And I talked to the planning team about whether we should allow said developer to come and talk to us so that we understood the problems that he had delivering affordable homes, because it's come up in our deliberations quite often. And in fact, at the last committee, we were uncomfortable about a planning application which we approved, even though it didn't deliver the affordable homes question. So I thought it was a topic that would interest us. In talking to Mr. Weimer, we thought a better approach was to pull together a variety of views, not just hear our view from one developer, but have a more sort of balanced and productive session, which we've agreed we will take forward and do at some stage, and hopefully that will interest members of the committee, so we understand, in a sense, from both sides of the argument, how difficult it is for us, as well as developers, to actually fulfil the requirements of the joint local plan on affordable housing. And the other thing we thought, or I thought in discussion with members of the committee, it would be useful to have, in a sense, as a training exercise at some stage, is one on conditions what things can you condition, when is the right time to put a condition on, and what sort of different conditions and unilateral undertakings and all those sort of things that surround planning decisions, so that when we have these debates, and we usually do have the debates about whether it's possible to condition this or possible to condition that, we're perhaps better informed about what is possible and what isn't. So those two things will appear in due course at these sessions. Councillor.
Yes, if we have anybody come in to actually explain why they can't go down the affordable house route, etc., etc. For me, we need to turn the wheel, because the developer is paying far too much for the land in the first place. Instead of having all the agreements for 106 up front, either by the developer or other developers, so they then sell the site for an exorbitant amount. We should go back to what it used to be, where the developer comes to us and say, what do you need? They then do the calculations and say, okay, landowner, we'll pay you that.
Yeah, well, that can come into the debate, and I think Councillor Guthrie would quite like also to slightly broaden it to include a developer that has managed to almost overfill the requirement for affordable housing. Well, how they done it, and other developers can't do it. So that sort of discussion, I think, would be really useful to have. So we'll organise that. Okay, before I draw the meeting to a close, any more?
Something that's cropped up today. If possible, I wouldn't mind just a couple of minutes with members privately after the meeting's finished.
Okay. In which case, I'll draw the meeting to a close, and we could stop the live streaming, please.